nightmare unfolds.
It's got to be a terrorist attack.
In New York, hijacked planes slam into the World Trade Center.
Move out of the way! Let's go! Hey, come on!
And the Twin Towers crumble. In Washington, a plane dives into the Pentagon.
We are at threat condition Delta. That is the highest condition that we can go to.
And near Pittsburgh.
Witnesses reported seeing the large passenger plane take a nosedive.
Still another plane crashes.
Some 44 people on board, all believed dead.
A country is outraged. The world is stunned.
Make no mistake, the United States will hunt down and punish those responsible for these cowardly acts.
Who is behind it? What happens next? The deadliest attack ever to strike America. As terror hits home.
And good morning. This is CBS News Up to the Minute, continuing coverage of the attack on America. I'm Melissa McDermott. Information continues to come into CBS News headquarters this morning. We are here to bring you the very latest information. In the meantime, as we try to make sense of everything that happened today, let's begin by realizing the nation is waking up this morning to the nightmare revelation that the United States is the victim of the worst terror attack in history. 4 jetliners hijacked and used as flying bombs in an attack on America. Thousands of people are believed dead. Many more are hurt. And the people of the United States shaken to the core as the search intensifies for those responsible. The prime suspect remains terror leader Osama bin Laden. The carnage began in New York City, where CBS's Byron Pitts begins our coverage.
8:48 a.m. Mayhem in Manhattan.
We saw a plane coming very low, and everyone said, wow, that plane is very, very low.
Come on, guys, keep moving. I was walking to work, and all of a sudden, I see a jet crash into the first tower.
An American Airlines flight loaded with 92 people crashes head-on into the North Tower of the World Trade Center.
And then we heard the crash. We ran to the window.
Into the building. It went into the Trade Center.
We hit the Trade Center. We saw the shrapnel fall, and then we said, get out.
And minutes later.
Oh, there's another one. Another plane just hit. Right. Oh, my God. Another plane has just hit.
I heard a roar, and I looked around thinking that it had to be a helicopter, and I looked up, and I saw the second plane hit.
A second commercial plane, a United Airlines jet, also hijacked, carrying 65 people, plows into the South Tower.
First one we thought was an accident. When we heard there was a second one, we definitely thought it was terrorism.
On the ground, witnesses could not believe their eyes. 70 stories up with the building burning. Reason gave way to desperation. New York's bravest never had a chance.
We really never even got to that close to the building. An explosion blew and it knocked everybody over.
Less than an hour later, the South Tower came crumbling down.
It collapsed. The top floors collapsed down. I saw it blow and then ran like hell. Thank God. I'm 69, but I can still run.
But it was far from over.
Tower 2 collapsed into Tower 1. Within minutes after that, we were ordered out.
When the dust settled, signs of life started to emerge.
Chaos. It's just chaos out here. It really is. So the Twin Towers fall. It's amazing. It's crazy. I can't believe it's happening. I really can't. It's nightmares. Armageddon right here.
This was the worst act of terrorism on U.S. soil, but not the first attack on the World Trade Center. 8 years ago, terrorists set off bombs in the basement in an effort to take down the 2 towers. They failed. Today, mission accomplished.
I tell you what, it's a sad day for America. It really is.
Firefighters and police officers and paramedics by the hundreds stood by, many of them feeling helpless. There was nothing they could do at this point because the building was still unsecured.
Our main priority is to get in, do a search and rescue, look for survivors, and then clean up what's left. And we can't do that until the building is deemed safe.
Ankle deep in debris and despair, rescue workers waited. Some had relatives of their own inside. One police officer told me her sister worked here on the 40th floor, due in at 9 a.m. She was always early, she said. Always. A sign on a paramedic's van spoke volumes.
We know we have some of the major brass of our department missing. We're trying to find them, too.
New York Port Authority Police Chief William Hall choked back tears. For him, this was no longer just work.
On a personal level, because I know that these are all your men and it's a business, but I'm sure that a lot of these guys are your friends. How you holding up?
Business now, it's personal now.
Sir?
It's personal now. We have to get them.
All day, we have had little relief here. Take a look at this. Hours ago, World Trade Center building number 7 collapsed. A 42-story building that crumbled hours after the initial devastation. It was the one calamity here that was not a surprise. Police had evacuated the area earlier, fearful building number 7 would indeed fall. Minutes after the second tower collapsed, I was standing a few blocks away with CBS News correspondent Mika Brzezinski. As the fireball rolled toward us, Mika grabbed her shoes, I grabbed her hand, and we ran as fast as hell. Thousands did. Byron Pitts, CBS News, Manhattan.
In fact, the human toll in the World Trade Center attacks may never be determined with any certainty. As someone who lives near the hospitals, which I do, I can say it was eerily quiet all day. Medical personnel standing by, waiting to see the wounded, yet none of the wounded came until early this evening when convoys of ambulances began going to the hospitals, bringing in the wounded. And that is what we are realizing now is we will not know the number of wounded and dead until probably early hours, if even then. They are now beginning to bring those wounded that they can find and dead into the hospitals. Some of those are buried, are using their cell phones to call for help, in one case to a loved one in another state. New York City Mayor Rudolph Giuliani would say only that the total casualties may be more than most of us can bear. The city raced to respond to the disaster, to put out fires and try to save lives. CBS's Elizabeth Caledon has that story.
Within moments of hearing the news, hospitals throughout New York City and the entire region shut down all normal operations, canceled elective surgeries, and transformed themselves into high-voltage trauma centers for a city under siege. By evening, the numbers of injured were stacking up at New York City hospitals, 140 at Bellevue, more than 300 at St. Vincent's. The most serious cases carried by dust-covered ambulances to whatever emergency centers could take them.
We had people with severe burns covering most of their bodies and their faces. We had a variety of people that came in cardiac arrest.
Bellevue, one of the city's biggest trauma centers, treated injured when the World Trade Towers were bombed back in 1993. Today, it was déjà vu. Patients here were treated for burns and smoke inhalation, head injuries, and broken bones.
They actually extricated one guy that had his legs amputated. He said that the amount of patient, the extent of the injuries, you can't really predict.
It was also déjà vu for Marlene Cruz, who was at work the day the World Trade Towers were bombed, and now this. He was in an elevator that plummeted when the plane hit the building.
I was screaming because I didn't know what the hell was going on. I had all the debris, concrete, everything fall on top, you know, so I wasn't sure.
Doctors speculate they are just beginning to see the extent of death and injury. There will be much more to come in the days ahead. Even emergency medical people trained for this type of thing can't believe it's happening.
It's an unbelievable thing. You keep thinking that you're about to wake up and it was all just a nightmare, and it really isn't real. I mean, it's just so unbelievable that this would happen.
A call for blood brought out hundreds of donors, too many for the hospital to accommodate. Those turned away are being asked to come back again in the coming days. Another major concern is not just handling the physical wounds, but dealing with the psychological trauma of the people who witnessed and survived this catastrophe. That is likely to yield thousands of more victims in need of medical assistance, perhaps for years to come. Elizabeth Caledon, CBS News, New York.
Now, shortly after the scope of the attack became clear, a sight not seen in American history, Air Force fighter jets buzzing the U.S. Capitol, flying air support in the event of any other attacks from the sky. While the Pentagon burned, aircraft carrier battle groups were dispatched to the seas off Washington, D.C. and New York City. CBS's David Martin has the story from the Pentagon.
fires are still burning, although Pentagon officials say the flames are under control and the Pentagon will be open for business. We now have new close-up pictures of the damage done by that plane, and Defense Secretary Rumsfeld had a grim warning that casualties will be high.
People have been lifted out and taken away in ambulances, and the numbers will be calculated, and it will not be a few.
The first attack ever on the Pentagon occurred at 9:38 a.m. Eastern Time.
Clip this pole over here, hit another pole and slammed right into the building. Huge explosion, and then utter pandemonium, as you might imagine. I mean, everybody was screaming, "Oh my God."
A hijacked American Airlines jet, which had just taken off from Dulles Airport, flew right up the main highway leading north into Washington and straight into the citadel of American military power.
There was no doubt about it. It was American Airlines slammed right into the building, and there was no doubt about it. Whoever was piloting that plane was aiming for the Pentagon.
Fearful that, like the World Trade Center, a second airliner was on its way, most of the building's 23,000 workers fled.
Plane's coming in. Come on. Let's go. Let's go. Come on. We're not playing around here. Let's go.
F-16 fighters circled overhead looking for a second attack, but the damage had already been done. The plane had drilled a hole about a third of the way through the world's largest office building. The wounded were rushed to nearby hospitals as the fire spread and an entire section of the building collapsed, trapping many, many more inside.
Arlington search and rescue personnel are just now, and it's about almost 2 o'clock, just now gaining access to portions of the building where the plane hit because the fires were too intense.
One ray of hope. The Pentagon is undergoing a major renovation, and some of the offices in the path of the plane were vacant.
We're trying to find out who made it out okay and account for the people that may not have made it out.
When the plane hit, Defense Secretary Rumsfeld moved from his office on the other side of the building into the National Military Command Center in the basement. With smoke hanging in the air, he ordered aircraft carriers, amphibious ships, cruisers, and destroyers to New York and Washington, where they can serve as floating hospitals, help with the cleanup, and provide air defense against the possibility of more attacks. And the chairman of the Joint Chiefs made a clear threat of military retaliation.
I have no intentions of discussing today what comes next, but make no mistake about it, your armed forces are ready.
Right now, suspicion focuses on Osama bin Laden, but first things first. The FBI is combing the wreckage for evidence, and all U.S. military bases and embassies are at the highest state of alert. David Martin, CBS News, the Pentagon.
Just by taking in the death totals from those 4 hijacked planes, we already exceed the number of people killed ever in a terrorist attack in the United States. Over 260 people we know are dead. And again, those planes had very distinct targets, the Twin Towers plus the Pentagon. Now, one hijacked plane, though, apparently never reached its target. A United Airlines jetliner went down near Shanksville, Pennsylvania. And, of course, there were no survivors. CBS News correspondent Steve Hartman is there.
This may be the hijacking that did not go as planned. This morning, United Flight 93 crashed in a cornfield 80 miles southeast of Pittsburgh, killing all 45 people aboard. The plane was en route from Newark to San Francisco when somewhere near Cleveland, it made a sharp left turn and started heading, at least in the direction of Washington, D.C. Authorities can only speculate as to what may have been the intended target. Investigators say the plane crashed at a very steep angle, leaving a gaping hole in the ground, but only tiny pieces of airplane. Shortly before the crash, a 911 operator outside of Pittsburgh got a call from a man who had locked himself in the bathroom of the plane. He told the operator the plane had been hijacked and stayed on the line for at least 1 minute. Then, authorities say, the line went dead, probably before the plane crashed. That tape is now in the hands of the FBI, because whoever that man was, he may be their only witness.
Steve Hartman reporting. Because this has never happened, as you can imagine, not only the American public walking through all of this in a daze, but also officials not knowing what to do. Seeking to reassure the American public and send a strong message to the rest of the world, President Bush addressed the nation last night. In a televised speech from the White House, the president vowed that the terrorist group, government, or country responsible for this attack will pay dearly.
Good evening. Today, our fellow citizens, our way of life, our very freedom came under attack in a series of deliberate and deadly terrorist acts. The victims were in airplanes or in their offices, secretaries, businessmen and women, military and federal workers, moms and dads, friends and neighbors. Thousands of lives were suddenly ended by evil, despicable acts of terror. The pictures of airplanes flying into buildings, fires burning, huge structures collapsing, have filled us with disbelief, terrible sadness, and a quiet, unyielding anger. These acts of mass murder were intended to frighten our nation into chaos and retreat. But they have failed. Our country is strong. A great people has been moved to defend a great nation. Terrorist attacks can shake the foundations of our biggest buildings, but they cannot touch the foundation of America. These acts shattered steel, but they cannot dent the steel of American resolve. America was targeted for attack because we're the brightest beacon for freedom and opportunity in the world, and no one will keep that light from shining. Today, our nation saw evil, the very worst of human nature, and we responded with the best of America, with the daring of our rescue workers, with the caring for strangers and neighbors who came to give blood and help in any way they could. Immediately following the first attack, I implemented our government's emergency response plans. Our military is powerful, and it's prepared. Our emergency teams are working in New York City and Washington, D.C. to help with local rescue efforts. Our first priority is to get help to those who have been injured and to take every precaution to protect our citizens at home and around the world from further attacks. The functions of our government continue without interruption. Federal agencies in Washington, which had to be evacuated today, are reopening for essential personnel tonight and will be open for business tomorrow. Our financial institutions remain strong, and the American economy will be open for business as well. The search is underway for those who are behind these evil acts. I've directed the full resources of our intelligence and law enforcement communities to find those responsible and to bring them to justice. We will make no distinction between the terrorists who committed these acts and those who harbored them. I appreciate so very much the members of Congress who have joined me in strongly condemning these attacks. And on behalf of the American people, I thank the many world leaders who have called to offer their condolences and assistance. America and our friends and allies join with all those who want peace and security in the world, and we stand together to win the war against terrorism. Tonight, I ask for your prayers for all those who grieve, for the children whose worlds have been shattered, for all whose sense of safety and security has been threatened. And I pray they will be comforted by a power greater than any of us, spoken through the ages in Psalm 23. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I fear no evil, for you are with me. This is a day when all Americans from every walk of life unite in our resolve for justice and peace. America has stood down enemies before, and we will do so this time. None of us will ever forget this day, yet we go forward to defend freedom and all that is good and just in our world. Thank you, good night, and God bless America.
But to punish those behind the attacks, obviously the U.S. must first determine who and what they are to cause these attacks. Right after that speech, the president went into a meeting with national security officers where, piecing together information from cell phones from passengers who were on the doomed flights, they were able to figure out, they think, that it is Osama bin Laden. Again, that is the speculation. That is the strongest theory right now. Osama bin Laden, the renegade Saudi millionaire, frequently mentioned. CBS's Jim Stewart is in Washington following the investigation and checking his sources.
U.S. intelligence officials and law enforcement no longer have just a theory about today's unprecedented attack. They now have some evidence, and it all points to Osama bin Laden. Sources tell CBS News that hours after the attack, intelligence agents detected what one official is calling significant indicators that the suicide planes were hijacked by members of al-Qaeda, the terrorist group that reports to bin Laden. Sources describe the intelligence as communications intercepts, but would not provide any details. It's not definitive, said one official, but it is persuasive. Sensing that bin Laden would quickly become a suspect, Afghanistan's ruling Taliban party, which has been giving him safe refuge, called a press conference. We do not allow Osama bin Laden to operate from our land, the Taliban said, warning the U.S. not to take any, quote, speedy actions to retaliate. Meanwhile, law enforcement sources said there had been no credible claims for the joint attacks and that intelligence had picked up no specific threats aimed at targets inside the United States before the attacks took place. Within minutes, officials were pointing to the 1993 bombing of the World Trade Center by a group with ties to bin Laden, citing it as proof that bin Laden has never given up on his dream to destroy the symbol of America's economic power. And in recent months, analysts say bin Laden has only become more and more sophisticated in his attempts to strike at the United States. They point specifically to his simultaneous attack on 2 U.S. embassies in East Africa.
They also went directly against a U.S. destroyer, which was heavily guarded, and they did put a hole in that ship, the USS Cole. So they have a track record of conducting attacks that one would think they might not be capable of.
Late today, the U.S. intelligence community was rapidly sorting through a priority list of potential suspects within the U.S. for electronic eavesdropping, with sources saying the number may reach into the hundreds. Some of the very doomed passengers themselves may have provided authorities with their first valuable tips. In panic desperation, some of the passengers, including, we're told, the wife of U.S. Solicitor General Ted Olson, called from a cell phone to say their plane had been hijacked. Another passenger called from the restroom at the rear of the aircraft. One passenger, it's been suggested, provided detailed information about one of the hijackers. The working theory by lawmen so far is that the hijackers were pilots themselves who forcefully took over the controls to dive their jets straight into the targets. Jim Stewart, CBS News, Washington.
To give us insight into which terrorist groups or even country could pull off such an attack, terrorist expert Dr. Steve Metz from the Strategic Studies Institute in Pennsylvania joins us now. Dr. Metz, good morning.
Good morning.
What was your first thought when you heard about the attacks this morning? When we realized it was a terrorist attack, was Osama bin Laden the first person that came to your mind?
I think it's very difficult to conceive of anyone else who could have put together something on this scale. And, I'll tell you, certainly my first thought was, as this unfolded, that we are seeing certainly a new stage in the war on terrorism. I think we have moved from sort of a pinprick, sort of below the threshold of public mobilization act to a full-blown act of war. So one of my initial thoughts was that whoever the perpetrator was, I think, had badly miscalculated or made a terrible error in this particular instance.
Now, there are denials coming from those associated with bin Laden that he would have the resources to pull off such an attack. Is that true?
I don't think so, because our understanding at this point is that the resources involved in this case are less a matter of massive amounts of money and logistics and things like that than a simple matter of putting together a handful of people who had the technical know-how to do this. I mean, he would have to have put together a handful of people who knew how to fly an airplane, perhaps people that knew the operation of a major airport. But I really don't see this as something that would require resources on a scale that would be beyond his control.
Now, it is very possible whomever is responsible recruited people within the U.S. Are there terrorist groups, Osama bin Laden, who could have done that?
Well, I think there certainly are any number of people within the United States who might have a gripe or a grudge against the United States who might be susceptible to that. But I think we also need to consider that it might not have been a matter of ideology or politics if they did in fact have accomplices in the U.S., but it could be simply a matter of cash. I mean, I know myself, I've had small items pilfered from my luggage during airline flights, and whenever that happens, my thought always is if someone someone is in desperate enough straits that they're willing to steal a jacket or a tape player out of a piece of luggage in the airline, how hard could it be to bribe them to put something in, to overlook something, or something along those lines?
Right. Another name that hasn't come up quite as frequently as bin Laden is Saddam Hussein. Is it more likely he would have the resources to pull off, or maybe even help?
Well, I don't know that it's necessarily an either-or situation. Of course, like everyone, I'd like to stress that it's purely speculation at this point. But I think in my mind, it's entirely conceivable that in some indirect way, agents of one were dealing with agents of the other. Because between the two of them, they certainly have access to not only massive amounts of money, but a fairly extensive network of various kinds of people around the world. So in fact, it may have been some kind of insidious coalition of the two, again, being purely speculation at this point.
Right. Now, as a terrorism expert, you think about this every day, but as Americans, we always felt that we could prevent this from happening, even if it ever happened, over a very remote chance. Do you think maybe that we were fooling ourselves and just not paying attention?
Well, I tell you, among people who are in the security field, there really was a feeling that it wasn't a question of whether there ever would be a major terrorist attack in the American homeland, but simply when it would happen. I think most people that look at this on a regular basis didn't expect it to happen like this, but really expected something using biological terrorism or weapons of mass destruction or something like that. So the method is surprising. The fact that there was an attack on the United States, given the fact that the United States is a high-profile world leader, given the number of people that move in and out of the U.S. every year, is not surprising. And my perspective on that was that September 11th, I think, will truly be one of those dates in American history that we can say the day before was, in a lot of ways, dramatically different than the day after.
Dr. Metz, what about copycat attempts now that this has happened? Was successful. They accomplished what they wanted to do. Should we worry about copycat groups?
Well, first of all, I would say that in terms of what they wanted to do, it's perhaps a little early to draw that conclusion, because what they wanted to do was to generate a particular attitude on the part of the American people, perhaps even a change in American policy. And my own belief is that was the item on which they badly miscalculated the will and the perspective of the American people. One of the things that we've seen when we've dealt with violence from the Middle East, if in fact that's where this is from, is that the people that are behind it, from Saddam Hussein to terrorists, often badly misunderstand the reaction that Americans will have. So my own perspective is that if the people that did this really thought that it would intimidate or cow the American people, I think they were completely wrong on that account. That being said, I think that your concern about copycats certainly is a valid one. Although I think we also need to keep in mind that until this time, our defenses, on the part of the FBI and other agents of the government, have been pretty successful. So.
All right. Dr. Metz, I'm going to have to cut you off there, but I appreciate your perspective in all of this. Thank you for joining us.
Sure.
All right, and we're going to take a break right now. We'll be back in a moment with our... Or I take that back. This is live TV. We're not going to a break. The shockwaves from the attack on America are being felt far beyond the immediate targets in New York and Washington. CBS News correspondents are standing by with that part of the story, beginning with Cynthia Bowers in Chicago.
I was scared. I was very scared.
Within minutes of the first reports, nearly 20,000 people poured out of the Sears Tower, the nation's tallest building, afraid it too was a target.
I would say a sense of anxiety, of nervousness, and people were anxious to leave the building.
Evacuations were ordered in the famed Chicago Loop, including the Board of Trade.
Everyone's concerned. You could see the look on their face.
One by one, federal buildings, museums, and colleges closed down. Extra trains were put on the tracks to get hundreds of thousands of people out of the downtown center, under the watchful eyes of military jets, with hundreds of police on the streets below.
Every sworn personnel in the Chicago Police Department, from the superintendent on down, will remain in uniform until further notice.
Security is so tight across the Midwest, passengers on this Delta jet in Cleveland were evacuated, while authorities made sure a threatened bomb was not on board. As business ground to a halt in Cleveland, workers heading home clogged roadways. Landmarks like the Arch in St. Louis were emptied.
I just felt like better than sitting home watching that, and this helped me feel like I'm doing something.
And blood banks began to fill as the enormity of this catastrophe started to hit home.
I think we need to pray for our country and pray for our president because, you know, this is the national crisis that people have been talking about for years.
With Americans feeling so vulnerable, officials here and everywhere are walking a fine line between taking the necessary precautions without creating additional panic. Cynthia Bowers, CBS News, Chicago.